Nationals called on the government to give struggling Kiwis some tax relief. We're going to talk about this with our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who's with us this morning. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morena.
Do we have a cost of living crisis?
Well, we are experiencing high inflation at the moment, as are many countries at the moment, particularly because of the impacts of COVID, Ryan. So that is having an effect in a number of economies, but also it is not projected to do that for a long time, as in it is projected to get better over the course of this year. But because of that, that's one of the reasons that we've done things like, for instance, say we will be lifting the minimum wage. We've also increased the family tax credit because that's a way that we can target our low and middle income families with a direct increase into their pockets to help during this period where we know, for instance, things like fuel prices are particularly tough.
So is it a crisis?
Oh, I wouldn't describe it that way.
Okay.
There is an impact that people are feeling, undeniably, but I would not describe it in that way.
Okay,
Ryan.
for those people who are feeling the impact, and you look at the numbers from the economists, you know, an extra $4,000 to $5,000 every year for the basics. This is food, this is rent, this is electricity. These are the basic things. $4,000 to $5,000 extra over the last 12 months. That's a crisis for those people,
So the thing that
isn't it?
we've always got to keep in mind, of course, is what's happening to people's income relative to their cost of living. Since we came into government, we know that, for instance, their incomes have been lifting more than that cost of living.
Not
what we're
last
seeing
year.
at the moment is an exception in this period of time. And as I've said, we're not alone in that. Many countries overseas are seeing the exact same things. And it's things like the price of crude oil having increased, which we're obviously not alone in experiencing that. And of course, the cost of some goods, because we know that we have more demand than there is supply, and we have supply constraints globally. So that we're seeing the impact of that. But as I say, there are predictions that that will ease.
Right.
And overall, incomes have tended to outstrip the cost of living.
So the cost of petrol will come down?
Oh, look, the cost of petrol right now, we know that what we're seeing now is, for instance, the impact of COVID and that recovery of many countries.
So it will come down.
We also see the impact of the Ukraine crisis. No, not necessarily, Ryan, not with Ukraine. But of course, we know that when we're measuring inflation, of course, we're looking at a number of different factors here.
Yes, but what's driving it?
It's very hard to predict what will happen with the cost of fuel with the Ukraine conflict.
But a big part, but you've just said on the one hand that costs will come down. You've now said you're not sure about petrol.
I was talking about inflation. I don't wish to make a prediction here about what we'll see specifically on fuel, Ryan, because we know that whilst New Zealand, of course, sources its fuel from a range of sources, predominantly Russia, and our importation there is relatively limited, within the global market, we're likely to see the impacts of this crisis on fuel prices.
Okay. Do you know what proportion of the price that we pay at the pump is tax?
I have done in the past. At the current prices, I know it relative to the increase in crude oil. So, you know, it's up over well over $100 a barrel now. So the increase that we've seen in the price of crude has outstripped the increases that have been caused by excise. It's about
52%, they reckon. So more than half of what we're putting into our cars.
As I've said, though, you know, you look at the increase we've seen at the pump since even last December, it's been significant, and that has not come from the increase in excise. We've said that we're not continuing to increase excise over this term, Ryan. People have seen increases regardless. That has not come from government. It's come from
you're still
the
taking
range
a cut,
of impacts of...
That's the problem. You're still taking a cut.
What was that?
You're still taking a cut of that increase, Prime Minister.
But again, Ryan, the increases that people have seen are far outstripped. Even if you were to remove excise increases, people would have seen still that increase at the pump, because it is not
it would be less.
Predominantly coming
half.
from that space.
It would be half if you guys...
Ryan, firstly, coming back to what excise is used for. It maintains our roads and it builds our transport projects. So if you're to remove excise, which every government has used, you basically stop your ability to maintain roads and to build new roading projects. The second point, we committed to no longer increasing excise over the course of this term. So we have not been. What people are experiencing at the pump is a result of a range of international factors that are beyond our control. We do recognise people are seeing that is causing them an increase in the cost of living, which is why we're doing things like increasing minimum wage, increasing the family tax credit to try and ease that here and now.
The thing is that your opponent in Christopher Luxon has said that tax cuts are the way to go, that if you earn the money, you deserve the right to know what to spend it on. And every little counts at the moment, doesn't it, because of the cost of living crisis, although you won't use the word, the crisis that people find themselves in every single day. So I guess the thing that you have to do is convince people that you are better as a government at spending that money than they are.
We have to talk about managing the economy and running the country as a whole. And Ryan, the point I would make is I've already listed some of the things that we're doing to try and ease things for New Zealanders right now. But the question we have to ask is that what the opposition have proposed cuts billions of dollars out of the New Zealand, out of our revenue as a government, and the ability to spend on things like health, on education. So there are two choices. They are either going to fund these billions of dollars worth of cuts by, for instance, cutting health or education, or they're going to increase debt. They didn't tell us yesterday how.
No, there is a third option.
They did not tell us how.
Yeah, there is a third option, though, Prime Minister, and that is this argument about wasteful spending that your government's been indulging in. The Provincial Growth Fund that created how many jobs? You know, the $50 million designing the cycle bridge that was never built. Trevor Mallard's $500,000 slide and playground. The fees-free university money.
I do not accept for... I totally reject that. A significant amount of the spending increase that we've seen coming from government has, for instance, funded the wage subsidy, the business support we've put in through COVID, have helped us achieve some of the lowest, if I might finish, if you're going to make an accusation of wasteful spending, I should have the right of reply on that. We have some of the lowest unemployment currently in the OECD, some of the lowest New Zealand has seen. We've kept people in work. That has made a huge difference to help us navigate this 1 in 100 year crisis. On top of that, we have some of the lowest debt in the OECD. So even though we've been in this crisis, we've managed to keep New Zealand's debt as low as possible given the circumstances. We've also had good, solid growth, again, relative to other countries. Our exporters are seeing some record exports right now. Yes, Ryan, these times are tough. We have seen the impact of inflation, but we have also seen that people predict we'll be coming out of that through the course of this year and that things will start to get better and ease. What I don't agree with is a proposal to cut billions of dollars, as the opposition have said, from the ability of government to invest in health and in education. Now is not the time to be making such moves.
OK. So your government's never wasted any money?
Oh, Ryan, look, of course there'll be on occasion, you know, the odd example where perhaps we may have been able to do. I'm not going to speak in absolutes.
Can you give us some examples?
But I also will not accept a broad brush claim that we've engaged in wasteful spending. I just don't accept that.
OK. Very quickly, I want to talk about Ukraine, because you've announced this morning that there'll be a sanctions bill specific to Russia, which will be introduced and you'll announce today. Will that mean that the likes of Alexander Abramov, who's a Russian oligarch who owns a $50 million estate in Northland, that asset will be frozen?
I'm not going to speak about individuals at this time, and we will get to a little bit more about the detail of what we'll be doing and who it will likely affect. But what we do want to make sure is that we have the ability to apply sanctions to both entities and individuals where, of course, they're likely to have an impact. But I won't get into individuals' assets or individual names at this time.
But the intention is for if you're an oligarch, if you're a friend of Putin's, and you've got a big asset in New Zealand, that would be what you'd want to target.
The intention is that we have the ability to target oligarchs. One of the things that we're very mindful of is with a number of the sanctions that are being put in place across Europe, what we don't want to see is suddenly an attempt to put investments or assets into New Zealand as a way of escaping other restrictions in other areas. So we need to make sure we're protecting ourselves against that.
And in terms of why you've decided to go for a Russian-specific solution to this when it could have been a more general sanctions system, is that because you're worried about one day having to impose them on China?
No. Of course, you'll have already heard that there has been an autonomous sanctions bill. Our view was that it wasn't quite fit for purpose. We'd been debating possible changes to it before this conflict struck. But just to name a couple of things that it wouldn't have done, it wouldn't have necessarily allowed the targeting of oligarchs. It wouldn't have, for instance, enabled us to take steps against movement around our maritime or airspace, and also questions over whether or not it would allow you to deal with human rights issues, cybersecurity issues. So this is a bespoke bill. We think it does the job that we need here and now, and that allows us to have a wider debate about autonomous sanctions in the future and a more general framework for the future.
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for your time this morning, Prime Minister. Always appreciated. I know you'll be as gutted as I am about the rhythm and vines too, which they've announced they have to skip for Easter. They'll be back at New Year's. That is, oh, she's gone. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern this morning.